Hello, and thank you for joining our webinar this morning. We are about to get started. Just a couple of housekeeping items. We will be recording this session and we'll send the recording to everyone that's registered. We also have the option for Q&A. So throughout the presentation, if you have any questions, just submit them in the Q&A section and we'll get to them at the end. And now off to Stephen.
Thank you. Yeah, let's jump right into it. So today we'll be going through, providing protocol-aware access and auditing in, complex organizations. We'll step through particular details, talk about some anti-patterns, and, really show how Teleport can help you with that. Now, first, we want to introduce you to the Teleport access plane, what it offers, the different areas of access and auditing it covers, and how it can help you to manage, what is often, just part of our, modern, IT infrastructure, having to onboard, offboard individuals. As I mentioned, go through some anti-patterns, things like using hard-coded, static keys, not having a procedure to offboard people in short intervals, things of that nature. And then wanted to step through, a typical life cycle of a user, when they first start onboarding, what often happens in any organization, some changes, something changes in how they're accessing resources, whether expanding or altering, and show how, you typically do that in the system, some of the best ways to do it. And then lastly, what if they're offboarding? They may leave the job, take a different position, and just show, how we can handle that in real time. So, as mentioned, we have the Teleport access plane. It is a method of consolidating all of your connectivity, authentication, authorization, auditing for your resources, things like your SSH servers, web applications, databases, Kubernetes, and desktops. And this allows you to have them all together, provide that connectivity to users, not using the typical, VPN only approach, or having to be in a private network, or potentially exposing it on the internet, but not having a secure method of having that. Because it is protocol aware, that allows you to record exactly what users are doing, what database queries they're running, what Kubernetes API calls they're doing, and being able to in real time get that information and alert that to your SIM or administrations if needed, and also authorizing that, being able to set at a role-based access control what resources user can see, using tags to control, when a user can access a resource, controlling what credentials they can go in as, and then also authorizing when needed to access additional systems. What if they need to go into production for an incident? Being able to authorize that in real time, and then when they're done, being able to automatically roll that back to their default, authorization. So this is an overview of the Teleport access plane. Teleport is both an access plane and a certificate authority. So we are certificate based. And if folks who have worked with certificates, that is a very secure technology. We feel it's one of the best ways to manage your issuing security credentials, mostly because it is short-lived, that certificates aren't issued permanently. They're issued for the time you have. You can also have those credentials revoked, but as often folks who get into certificate management, it is management. It does take, being able to operate a certificate authority, managing it, keeping it secure, and then continuing to update that. So that is a big part of what Teleport offers for both its open source and enterprise editions. Teleport is a Go-based solution. It can be deployed in your own infrastructure. We also offer a hosted service. There's a whole host of options in terms of whether you do it in a Kubernetes cluster, on Linux VMs, however you'd like to host it. We can always step through that it's a very flexible system down to, as small as running on Raspberry Pi up to, very large installations hosting, tens of thousands of, users and resources. Now, in terms of how the system is split up, you have a teleport auth service that includes the certificate authority. That enables teleport to issue certificates both for users and resources. When our agent connects for a resource, it forms a mutual TLS relationship. Then you have a secure connection. It's also tracking the activity in the auth service via the audit log. So when a user comes in through our proxy, which is a stateless part of the teleport access plane, that allows a user to authenticate, interact, with the system via their different channels, whether that's the web console, Sumi step through examples of that using kubectl for Kubernetes, as well as standard database clients like pgadmin or others. Now, once that developer comes in or SRE authenticates, it'll go through the auth service, an identity manager like an Auth0, an Okta, an Azure AD. Those, after the user authenticates there, the auth service will use the metadata or traits from that connection and issue that certificate. So a user could get, they have these roles, they have these usernames, these are they require an MFA when they connect to certain resources, and that short-lived certificate is issued to them. And then at that point, they can access these various resources. You'll see me do that as we go through some demonstrations. And when we're good to go, then we have, access and auditing in action. Now, this is a one state of their access. A big part of it, as I mentioned already, was around giving additional access. What if you have a production outage? What if they need to do a deployment to a production system where you want to apply, zero trust kind of approach? So in that case, you'd often ask for, an access request in this case. And so a user can, through teleport, request that access, say, I want to get into this particular role or resource. They request it. Another manager can approve it. Again, that's based on their roles about who they can approve. We also support integration with tools like Slack, Jira, Mattermost, so that users can be told when there is a waiting request. It also can, in some cases, auto approve the request. Such as a user on duty, as an SRE, as in PagerDuty. And this is a good practice to say, well, when you're on duty, you can get access to these systems, but you have to justify it. Why am I going to the system? What is my reason? And then the system can auto approve it in that case. Well, before we go further in, some presentation, why don't we take a look at, a little bit of action of teleport. So in this case, you can see I've logged into the web console and I have a number of systems available. I can then connect directly in with one of my users, interact with the system, full color system. I can see who's on the system, what I can access, multiple interactions here. And everything I'm doing is being tracked about what are the active sessions. Now, once I finish a particular session, then it is replayable as web sessions. You can see here I have different ones. I have the SSH session that I can play. I also have sessions available for my desktop access. And along with that, we have that audit log I mentioned as part of the auth service, tracking all of our interactions, also when certificates are issued, and when we have different Kubernetes actions. Now, along with this is, any of this session log can be sent to a SIM, which is a best practice we recommend. So in this case, I have Elastic. I can see the various interactions users have seen. I can see how many people are in systems. I have my sessions available here. I can even click directly into a session and replay it. Not a very exciting one, but I can do it. Now, along with things like SSH, you also have AWS console access, the ability to launch into AWS. We can go into things like Grafana. Now, an important thing here is notice that all of this is passwordless. So I haven't had to, provide a certificate file. I haven't provided a certificate. Everything I'm doing is being enabled through this. We also have the ability to require not a certificate or password, but providing a MFA. So I'm going to go into this particular system. Oops, sorry, wrong one. I'll come back to that. But you can require, in some cases, additional identification by the user through a YubiKey, or perhaps through their fingerprint button on their particular machine. Now, stepping back into how you work in a large organization, what is important is notice not using expired credentials such as static keys. So in this case, when I logged into Teleport, it will issue me a short-lived certificate. It has a certain time span, whether that's 3 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours, but it does have an end time. Versus if I'm using just a static key, there's no expiration on that. There's no way to track exactly when that access should have ended. And it's hard to revoke that as well. So we definitely recommend not using expiring credentials, whether it's static keys or passwords. Also, users trying to track many passwords can be difficult. And even having a long length password, often users, they won't remember themselves. They're going to store it somewhere, and you don't want to risk exposure there. The other part is terminating access in real time. So you saw I'm in and out of various systems. It's important that if there is some type of breach, there is an incident or an offboarding, that you are able to terminate that access in a large, complex organization. And you can even track when that happened and how it happened. And that's something I'll show with our Bob user in a little bit. Now, the other part is, okay, what are the sources of truth for this person's authorization? What says, what they're allowed to access? And if there's a lot of different systems saying that, it can get hard to get down to, okay, were they in the production group? Were they in this customer's area? What gave them that? And if there's more than one place giving that, then it's complex. So often that's why we use a single sign-on, which can, again, be an Auth0, it can be a GitHub, but that's a source of truth of they should have these credentials. They should be able to come in. Versus if you have a lot of disconnected ones, it can be hard to form a single user identity to say what should they have access to. The other is not having audit trail. In some cases, we sometimes see that there's certain users given a lot of credentials. Other people are locked down, but these users have super user and are not tracked, are not required to meet certain passwords requirements or MFA requirements. And, it's a balance of, sometimes that's a balance of usability, why that happens. And if you notice, as I was interacting with the system, it's very seamless to go in. I can jump into various systems, access them very quickly. So it's really about, that balance of, seamless access along with auditing. So in this case, we have a system that is friendly to the user, can help them to work quickly, versus adding a lot of complexity of security, having to provide, different passwords at different times, providing, so many places that you're having to, provide a poor user experience. And then another part is sometimes a person will be given too much access early on. They may only access certain systems day by day, but they're given prod access all the time. And they could, in some cases, we've seen people accidentally, knock out various systems. They connect to the wrong database and they accidentally wipe out tables they didn't mean to. So often, not having too much access is a good idea. Restricting, as I go through my day, what are the systems I regularly access in a benign way that should be read-only to start, how I access things like databases. And then when I do need to make changes, I specifically will apply it as a change versus always having write or maintain access. And then lastly, kind of related to the terminating in real time, but how do you offboard people? Is it a very complex process, or can you specifically say, this user is going to be locked? we're going to remove their roles, and within the expected amount of time, they will no longer have any remaining sessions or access to systems. And a lot of that comes from also thinking of it backwards. How not there's starting from I need to offboard this person and then getting to it, but what is the policy you want to put in place? Where do you want to get to of this is when this person's credentials should all be stopped, all accessed, within X number of hours on a target date, and then working back through, okay, how should these systems do that? Where is the accountability that this did happen? That is in an immutable log. And part of what Teleport can do is give that real-time locking of users when they're ready to offboard. You can also lock other things like roles or nodes, so that if you have certain maintenance periods where you don't want people accessing systems, you can leverage that. But I'd say a lot of it is to look at it backwards of what is our ultimate goal, and then how do we work back from that to make sure that the right systems apply those changes in the appropriate times. Okay. So to illustrate, what is a typical person in these type of organizations, we're going to work with Bob. You can see, Bob has a nice tie, doesn't have much of a face, but it's just how it is. So we're going to start out with, Bob. Previously I showed you a snapshot of going into the console with a fair amount of access to different items. In this case, we're going to work with Bob, who has a lower level of access, really starting with a dev labeled access, is able to request prod to perform any kind of maintenance, but we'll see, when Bob would be allowed and maybe when he is denied as he goes through it. We'll show in this case a change. So, what would happen when we actually changed Bob's, access and expand it, as he gets promoted. And then lastly, okay, how do we offboard Bob if he's maybe going on for an education sabbatical or something of that nature where he should no longer be in the system. Okay. Well, here I'm going to go ahead and log in, as Bob. I'm in his specific browser, so I'm going as Bob at Teleport Infra. So now you'll notice that there's, a lot less systems as compared to our other interaction. Bob, it just has, a few servers here. He can go in as himself, can also go in as, other more generic users. Again, Teleport is, tracking this. You can also see some of the other sessions that are occurring in the system. Up to you if you want to allow that. That's really up to your policy. And Bob can still interact with things like databases and the other. In this case, when Bob is ready to, connect to a database, he can list from, a local command line. And see that same listed database from his own desktop. Just previous to this call, I had logged in locally as Bob. So you can hear here he's in, what role he has, cluster. Now, when he's ready to connect to a particular database, he can simply say TSA DB. I want to go in as view user, because again, as I mentioned, it's a good policy to use view only to start. I know I'm going in as a sample Northwind. In this case, I'm going to connect to a Postgres database we have. Sorry, I forgot the TSD connect. And okay, I did a better job that time. Sorry about that. And now we can list a set of users. We also have some other tables in here we can interact with. Longer one, employees, really long. Go back, we can see that all that interactivity will be recorded. What a user is connecting as, what database they connected to, they're allowed to connect to that. As here I have a certificate issued. So that certificate is important of, what are my credentials that I'm allowed to. It consolidates all of my roles together, and then provides me what is my single access. You can see here in this case, I can go in as Bob user or view user. I can list different databases. It also lists my AWS access and other logins. So this is tracking exactly what I have. And from an auditing perspective, it's very helpful to go back and see, if a person should not have been in a system, and tracking, okay, how were they issued that? And this is exactly how you could see, well, why were they given permission to get into a specific system? Now, in often cases, Bob has, this default set of credentials. Can also see things like desktops, going directly into that. So we're in a regular server for any kind of interaction. You'll notice that, each of these environments have that dev type tag. So that's limiting, or in this case, dev and test. So in this case, dev users can see dev and test, but that's limiting those to specific systems with that tag. These can also be used for informational, which can be helpful in a complex organization, that you're able to collect, information on what is the status of these systems. And that way, if there is any kind of issue like too much memory, or you're seeing some strange amount of activity, you can record this as well. So it's not just useful from a security perspective. Now, in Bob's case, he wants to check something on production. So he'll go ahead and request. We get prod. In this case, he does not give a reason. Now, when Bob does this particular request, that can be sent through our Slack request here. You'll see that I have that interaction, user Bob, but he did not give a reason. And when we onboarded Bob, we'd explained to him how important it was that he does provide the reason for going into especially a system like production. So we're going to go back into, as our administrator, in this case myself. I'm going to take a look at those access requests. Do it and say, well, I don't have a reason here and I need one. So right now I'm going to deny it. Have a reason. Sorry about that. I just changed something a little earlier, so I might have to skip over the access request part. But essentially, it was going to show that when Bob got this access request, he would then be able to see some other systems such as that. We'll go ahead and skip over to a change in Bob's user access. In this case, when Bob is issued a certificate, then that uses the credentials from, or the metadata from Auth0. So we can actually see in this case, within Auth0, in particular, these are the roles that are coming over. Right now, this is in a JSON format. We want to expand that. In this case, I'm going to also give him the customer role. We'll let that, this is part of, Bob's promotion to a different role that he's now able to handle customer accounts. So we'll go ahead and save that. And now we're going to log back out, and pretend that we're, a couple weeks or months down the line, Bob will re-log in. And you notice this change here. So when the certificate was issued, the new certificate that Bob gets with his credential, they also have a role MFA required. So we're assigning that this is a role, of sensitive machines where a user can access, but they would have to require MFA. And it's going to require verifying the identity. And Bob did that. And I did that with my, on my particular Mac. You also could have done that with, a YubiKey as well. So any of those kind of MFA devices, teleport, will allow you to do that. So that's all well and good. Bob, we've shown how, Bob had a different set of credentials when it changed. The system can easily now map them to that new set of roles based on when those roles come in, we map them to that separate teleport role. In this case, Bob is required to use an MFA. If he does want to change those, we have our two-factor devices. In this case, I have a single item. I could also add another one here. It does require that you confirm with your MFA before you add more. So that has those safeguards built in. And there, it's up to you in terms of the roles to configure which systems, all or some, require MFA. But particularly your sensitive systems, we'd recommend leveraging that. Now, let's say, Bob is, going to be going on that sabbatical. Come back at a later date. And let's say Bob is, left for a day. Unfortunately, he did not close all of his workstations and left some up. And we do want to make sure that we offboarded, Bob correctly. So in that case, we're going to introduce what we call a lock. So a lock lets us, stop access in real time to any sessions he has open. And we do this through our tcuttle administration tool. And we can simply say tcuttle lock, give a user. In this case, I'm going to give a permanent lock. I can also give a temporary lock where I might say, oh, I need to take this down, your access down for 10 hours or something of that nature. In this case, we'll just go ahead and do it permanently. And you notice in this case, it disconnected. So Bob has stopped having his access in real time. Any interactions will stop. If we go back to our audit log from our administrator, we'd be able to see, what has happened, that a client was disconnected, that it did lock, that it is in force. And that's, again, important that not only do you sever the connections and make sure that they're done, but we have that immutable log of what happened and saying that this user is no longer allowed to be in the system, and we have accountability about where that occurred and how it was enforced. And just to step through here, how I interacted with that, just to probably because there was a number of steps we did here. So Bob, was part of, in terms of his IDP, part of the dev group. He may have, in some cases, been multiple dev groups, but for simplicity, let's focus on him having a dev role or dev grouping. Once we have that dev grouping come in, that will match and teleport to a particular role. And then that gives him access to various labeled resources. As you saw, I was able to go into certain Linux servers, also see some databases that were, related to that, and then interact with those various resources. And everything I was doing was both giving me seamless access, but then also auditing what I was doing. Now, in the case of when there is a change, in this case, we added we added Bob to an additional group called customer. You may have multiples as well, but again, just for straightforward, in this case, we just labeled customer. That also maps to other tagged resources called customer X. You also have the option of not just a one-to-one matching type, but you can also follow patterns of customer star all or all of your items. So in that case, when a person gets that kind of grouping, it's easy to have a pattern of your resource matching. And we definitely would recommend using patterns in order to label things. So that way, when you do have changes or items, it's really easy to do that. So again, we've gone through the journey with Bob, showing of how does he first get access, very simple, direct. He's then able to interact with the system. When there is a change introduced at the SSO layer, that flows through into teleport. So now he automatically gets access to these other resources. Things like MFA might be enforced for those, and then he does have to provide that MFA device as part of his interaction. And then as Bob goes through his journey, in this case, he's go off on sabbatical, we make sure to stop his access so that there aren't any lingering sessions. Nothing can try to use his credentials if they still exist to get into the system. And that way, hopefully, when Bob does come back, we're able to easily restore that, take off the lock, and then he's good to go. Well, I hope folks enjoyed stepping through that end-to-end of how you provide that access and auditing in a complex type organization. You're welcome to learn more to come to our documentation site as well as our regular site, and that really steps you through end-to-end, how to set up your own server. You can use our open source offering, as well as see about registering for a cloud or other trials. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, for that great presentation. And thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next time.